Hello. In this video, by popular demand, I'm going to focus on a speed run of a to-do list app. So in this video, we won't be creating a minimum viable product because we'll be missing some key aspects, but we will get the sort of first draft done. So if I pull up this whiteboard, we can do a little bit of planning here. It's always a good idea to do planning even if you are rushed. So what we're going to do is talk about an MVP, a minimum viable product. And what an MVP requires is that your app meets the user needs, and it also has to be bug and error free, and it has to be accessible. So the abbreviation for this is A11Y, accessibility, and this is critical. It's not only a nice thing to do, a good thing to do, but it is legally required by the Americans with Disabilities Act. So you cannot just make a website that you're going to profit off of, for example, and just only have it be accessible to some users and not others. So it's a really important thing to focus on. But for our speed run, we're going to focus here. A lot of times you'll find that an app can experience what's called feature creep. So this is where you get a lot of cool ideas about all of the styling or a lot of the features that you want to add to your app. And this is actually not something that is a part of a minimum viable product. And it's also oftentimes an enemy of accessibility, because when you add a new styling, if you're not conscious of accessibility, sometimes just using the basic HTML elements and CSS is actually going to have better accessibility than when you try to overthink things yourself. You have to really overthink things to get new features to be right all around. So right now we're going to focus on the top two, and we'll come back to the other one in a future video. But what we will try to make it as accessible as possible given the time constraint. So we also still need to do some planning, decide what we're going to do. So we're building a to-do app, and the basic features that we want to have here are going to be add text txt to-dos. We want to edit those. We want to be able to delete. We want to be able to clear all. And we want it to be able to persist to the browser. So when we reload the page, we don't lose all of our to-dos. They're saved from session to session on the user's device. So things that we're going to have to do here are decide what we're going to build it as fast as possible, test it, and make sure we meet the user needs and we have no bugs or errors, and then at some point we'll have to come back to accessibility to meet a minimum viable product. So it can help often to draw out what we're actually going to build so that we have an idea and we don't experience feature creep. So we're going to maybe make a title of to-do list app, or to-do app, or something like that, and that'll be like our H1 of our page. And then we might have some sort of input in which we can add some text there and then use a button to do the add action. And then once we add those to-dos to our list, we're going to have to show them somewhere. So we might want an H2 somewhere down here. So we can mark this as an H1 in our plan. And then maybe an H2 for to-do items as an H2. And then under there we might have like an unordered list, like bullet points, and then those are going to be like a bullet, and then item 1, a bullet, item 2, so on and so forth. And we're also going to need a way to clear those, so we probably want buttons on here for deleting and editing. And it's just a, kind of a rough sketch of what we want. We probably want the text in here to be actually the word delete rather than an X, but we know what that means for now. And then we're going to need some sort of transition. When we click this edit button, we're going to need to transition what we see on those items to be a form similar to our adding form that now is going to be an update form. And in there, we'll change the current item 1 to be something else, so that will transition back to the previous state where we were in the regular item view. So just by doing a little bit of planning here, we know what kind of elements we're going to need. And one thing that we can see as well is that we have duplication of certain elements on our page that are going to have a lot of the same concepts going on, but then there might just be some little differences that we can change with, for example, React props. So let's keep this in mind and move forward with starting to code. This has been about 5 minutes, 6 minutes of planning, but by doing that planning, you'll see it's actually going to accelerate the process a little bit rather than having to just kind of wing it in terms of what we're building. So I'll open up a terminal and I will navigate to my code folder and then to my web folder, and I will npm create vite at latest. So this could be integrated into a larger multi-page project at some point. I'll call it to do. But right now, I'm just going to make a React JavaScript project, and then I can always integrate this code later as long as I understand how things work. So I'll do code to do to open that in VS Code and then get started with the coding. So right away, I'm going to open a terminal. I'm going to make things a little bit bigger, and I'm going to get rid of boilerplate code that I don't want. So I can npm I to install the dependencies, and then I'll do an npm run dev to get up and running so I can start seeing the changes that I'm making live. And right away, I know that there's a React SVG. I know there's this Vite SVG that are kind of boilerplate SVGs I don't necessarily want. So I could replace those SVGs. It would be professional if I did, but that would take a lot of time. So it's not necessarily a first 80% of the work kind of thing. It might be a last 20% of the work type of thing after addressing accessibility. So we'll do an npm run dev to get the app going and check it out. So we'll see that we have this basic React app, and we don't want all that boilerplate, so I'm going to split this to the right and make it smaller, and then split this to the left with the Windows left arrow key, Windows key left arrow key. So I'll see we have this app.css and JSX. I don't really need these. I didn't build these. We have some basic CSS that Vite gives us. I will shrink this so we can see what's going on here. I know from experience I don't really want anything that's in here, and I really just want the basic white background, black text, and gray background, white text. So I'm going to get rid of pretty much every other style, and I'll keep all this kind of font smoothing and font family and stuff that I like. So now that I have cleaned that up a bit, I can go back to the main JSX, and rather than importing app, which I had deleted, I will just create a function called app of my own, and in here I can just return hello world just so I can make sure, sanity check that that's working. I can also visit my HTML and see how things are laid out here. You can see that there is the body here, and then there's a nested div inside of that. It's not necessarily what I want, so I'm going to move my script tag below the body, and then I'm going to eliminate that root div there, and I'll just use the body itself to attach my React app to. So now we've got an error. but that's as simple as just changing this to a query selector for the body rather than a get element by ID of root. And now we have that coming back, and we can get a sense of what sort of styling is on there if we need to change any of the styling going forward. But right now we just know our app is essentially the body, meaning all of the visual content on our page. Now we have the title of Vite plus React. That's an easy accessibility thing to fix, so we can just call this to-do app, and that's going to make it more accessible and better labeled for everyone. So we do know that we're going to want an H1 from our design. We know we want an H1, and we're just call it something like to-do list app. There should be one H1 on a page only. We'll call it to-do app. And then we can return a fragment here so that we can put multiple React components side by side without having to wrap them in a div and then make styling exponentially harder. So we also know that we're going to want an input. So since we're going to have an input and a button, it might make sense to put this inside a form. So we can just create a form, and we'll do no action for now. We also are going to want an input type text and an add button. That's a pretty good suggestion here. More that we'll need to add to this, but we do know at least we have this right now. Add will do the default action for a form, which is to refresh the page, so we'll need to fix that. And we're also going to want that UL for our LIs that are going to contain the item, IT1 for example. So if we just wanted to hard code this to get a sense of what's happening here, we could just hard code a couple items, 2 and 3. Okay, so now already we have a lot of the work done. We also need a title for this, so we could use an H2 to say that this list is the to-do list. Making to-do one word is going to make a screen reader read it out as Toto, which is not necessarily the best, so that's why I'm separating it into words. And to group these together, since they go together, it might make sense to put them inside of an article or a section or something like that. And then the to-do list items, right now they're list items. If they got more complex, maybe they could be articles as well. In terms of the form, that's relatively self-explanatory, and we're already inside the body, but what we are working on is actually the main content for the page, so it wouldn't be crazy to put this inside a main element rather than a fragment. So this is main, meaning it's not the header or the footer. Had that closing tag wrong, and there we go. So now we have some different parts of this. Probably good to group this together with a section, but we can just leave that for later since it's more of the accessibility part of the MVP. So now we have some items. They're all hard-coded. Our form reloads the page, but it doesn't really do anything, so that's not useful. Let's use state from React so that we can maintain some reactive variables. So we can import use state from React, and there we can do let's make an example to do so that we get a sense of what our data looks like. So const to do item example, just call it ex, is going to be, for example, it might have an ID of, let's just, for simplicity, since IDs should be unique, let's make it like date.now. So every time we call that, we'll get the current, something like the seconds since 1970, which will be a unique number every time. And then we can make the text, item, whatever, item plus date.now. So then we can put this a const data array example would be just an array with a couple of these items. So for example, we could just put one of those items in there. And then in here, when we do use state, we can do const to-dos, set to-dos equals use state with the starter data of the array example. And then in here, we'll just map over our list items. So we'll do curly braces and then to-dos.map, map the to-do. We'll pull out the ID and the text, and then we can do ID and text inside of this. I don't want a checkbox. I will want a delete button, so that's actually not a bad idea. And we see that time it was created being unique every time, since it just gets created once. It's going to be the same over and over. Delete button does nothing, and we also don't have an update button, so we could create those if we wanted, or an edit button. And so we can't delete anything. We only have one to do because it's hard-coded. So how can we make our form to actually make edits to this list? We're just going to need some sort of on submit for this form. So on submit is going to be handles submit. Call that anything. We're just choosing a name, and then we can do a function handle submit, which is going to prevent the default. I like E for simplicity as the parameter here. Prevent the default, which is to reload the page, and we could just alert the new form data, which is the contents of the form's data of the e.target, which is the form element, and we can get the to-do text, which will be the name of our form input. So we currently don't have a name on that, so we'll have to put a name equal to that to-do text, and that way when we try to add this, we should get an alert that tells us that has been added. So we're pulling that data out properly. We could also probably be smarter with this, but since we have one item, let's just proceed with that method. So we can just change the, we should put this handle submit inside here so we can access the state setter. So now instead of this, we want to set our to-dos. So we're going to make a function setter, which is going to take the previous to-dos and it's going to change them. So it's going to be, we could also make this const setter, just make it simpler as an arrow function, equals prev to-dos, and it's going to map prev to-dos to a new object, which is going to be all of what's in to-dos now. So not a curly braces, sorry, a square brackets of everything that's in to-dos now. And then also it's going to add a new one at the end, which is the new to-do. And so we need some way to pass that new to-do in here. And so we can do that with another arrow function, a double arrow function. So we'll say take the new to-do and pass it in, and then that will have a callback that takes prev to-dos and appends that new to-do to it. And then we can simply do a set to-dos. It will create the new to-do with date.now, and then we will get the text from there and set to-dos with the setter. And then when we add the new to-do, we should get those adding down there, and they're going to have unique IDs because they have that ID being unique as we created it. You can see that if we just throw that ID in there, you'll see even if it has the same text that it's going to have different moments of creation. I guess you could be really fast with this and potentially get a non-unique ID. Delete now doesn't do anything though, and when we reload our page, everything disappears because it's all in state. So we should probably handle now the deletion of one of these. So we're going to need an on click on this that says delete to do, and we can just pass in the entire to do. So we'll just pass it in like that, since that is everything that is in the to-do. Might be better if we had it like it was before, but we'll just leave it this way. And delete to-do doesn't exist yet, so since delete is a reserved word in JavaScript, remove to-do might be a better name. So I'll do function remove to-do is going to take the to-do, and it is going to need to have this, a similar setter. So it's going to take the to-do in, then the next arrow function will take the prev to-dos. We'll filter the prev to-dos whether that prev to-dos ID is different from the to-do.id. So meaning we're going to keep only those which are not this ID, i.e. remove this ID. And we'll set to-dos using the setter so that we don't have a race condition. If we simply passed in something based on the to-dos variable up here, we would have a race condition. So that's why we have to use this setter. And now we can see if removes will work. We seem to have some kind of bug here. What happened? Yep, so this is actually trying to call the remove to do function, which is not what we want. So we probably want this to be an arrow function so that we can pass that in and actually get a function rather than calling the function right away. So we're going to call remove to do, and that's going to, I'll call it to do remover now because we're making this change, and do const to do remover is going to be a function that comes from the to do. It's going to be a function arrow to an anonymous function that takes no arguments, or really this would take the event, the E, but it's going to be underscore because we don't care about this event. We're not using that event for anything, and it's simply going to return. It's simply going to do the actions inside of here. So we don't need that. And let's see if we add some to-dos. Can we delete them? And yes, we can, because now we're using to-do to get a callback function, which then the onClick is getting a callback function rather than just having this called a single time. And now we also need to be able to edit the to-do. So we need to be able to transition to a form that looks like this, but except with update instead of add. So this would be a good time to pull out our form into a component, since we're going to reuse it. So we can copy that form, and then we can go down here. Let's see, function single input form, or single text input form, and that will essentially just return that form, and it'll take maybe a handle submit function, or maybe for clarity we could do an on submit as one of its props, and then the on submit can get passed through here with clever little spreading on submit, so that we get on submit equals on submit in this form attribute or prop. And then we can also change, this is going to be to do text. For simplicity, we could just keep that the same, but if the on submit is going to be looking for a certain name, we might want to know what that name is. So we could probably take a name and change this out with a name from the prop, and then, or maybe we'll call it input name. It'll be name colon input name. Same as doing name equals input name. And then the submit is going to be add, but we won't want the button text to be different. So we'll do button text right here. And Now we have those props returning this, and that's pretty good. So let's see if we can replace this particular form with that by doing single text input form with the on submit as handle submit. The input is going to be to do text, and the button text is going to be add. So we can drop that. Didn't save us too much space, but it is going to help out when we create another input form. So now when we click this edit button, we need to toggle between this display of this stuff to the display of the single input form for update. So a good way to do that would be with an if-else or a ternary operator, but we're going to need a variable that controls that state of the editing or not. So we'll do const edit set edit, but that would be for the entire to-do list, and we need a separate editing state for each of these. So it might be a good time to pull out the list item as its own thing. And if you think, why didn't we just do this from the beginning? The reality is, when you build these things, you're going to realize that you need to pull something out, not when you first put it in, but at a later time. So we'll call this the to-do list item, since it is going to be an li at the end of the day. So we will have this and copy it into here. The catch being, we will return this, but we won't need the key equals ID here. That's actually going to go on the component directly under the map. So we would want that to be right here, where it's directly under the map, since it's all for React. And then the to-do list item, it might just be good to pass in this as the to-do as a full object. And so we can do that trick of to-do, so that's to-do equals to-do as the prop. And then the key equals ID can just be to-do.id. And when we get in here, we're going to destructure those props, not the key, because that's not a prop, that's just for React, but we will have a to-do. And it's going to have the const ID text equals to-do. So we can have the text in there, and then to-do remover is now getting lost, so we will need to have the to-do remover passed in as a prop, which means we'll need it up here. And then we'll also probably need a to-do updater, which we haven't created yet. So we're going to return conditionally based on the editing state, which we can put inside of this particular item, since it's going to have, each item is going to have its own editing state. This one can be edited separately from that one. So we'll do const is editing, set is editing, or I just like editing, set editing, use state false. So by default, we are not editing it. Happening there. Const, I had misspelled const. Const editing, set editing equals use state false. And then inside of here we can do if else in React components. So if editing, we can return one thing. We can essentially short circuit the function. It's a nice trick to use. So if editing, we're going to want to return one thing, which is going to be that single text item input form, and it's going to have an on submit of something. It's going to have an input name and a button text. So why don't we just go ahead and spread those props exactly as their correct names would be, like this, and then we can create those in the scope of the component here. So function on submit will be prevent default. We will get the name. We're not sure about what that name is yet, so we'll do const input name equals to-do text would be fine, but let's just make it like updating, updater, to-do text, and then we can use that name right there as a variable. And then our setter is going to essentially set the, I don't know, I didn't write this, so I'm not super comfortable with this. So I'm going to say const index is prev todos.find index where the IDs are the same, and then we're just going to say const new to-dos is copy the old to-dos, and we're going to set new to-dos at index.text equals to the new text. Yeah, technically that's true. I'm just going to set the entire to-do to be that item, and I don't really want this. I want the setter to take the to-do itself, and I want it to set the to-do to that to-do and return the new to-dos inside of there. So that seems reasonable, and we'll just do t for that one, t, and then this one will be to-do.id. So this to-do is referring to this one. Now, and this could get confusing as well. Call it T2, since there's already a to-do in scope. So we'll do T2.id, T2, and then this one is going to be T or T1. And now set to-dos to be setter of ID and new text. That seems fine. And set to-dos is not defined. So we need a way to, we were actually just going to update the to-dos and have the remover is here. We're going to have the updater up at a higher level. So we can essentially pull these aspects up there. So it'll be const to do updater is going to do what we had defined here, except this one was T2. To do updater, it's going to take a to do and return a callback function for const setter equals to do, yeah, it's doing this map thing again, which I just want to do my own implementation here, and we'll call it T2. And there we go. So setter of to do, that should be good. This one is still unused, which is fine because we're going to pass it in down here. Easy. Use the to do updater here, and then all we have to do is simply call the, we just call this text, so it's easy to assemble the object. New to do is ID text, and ID comes from the ID up here, and then I guess new text is fine because that's more clear that we're using a different variable for that. And set as editing will be correct, but we need to do the to do updater on this, and there we go. Except to do updater of to do is going to return a function, and so I think this won't work because first of all we need the edit button to turn on the edit state, so we need an on click of set editing to true, so that will get our edit state to crash apparently. Button text is not defined, so we need some button text defined here. Const button text is update, so edit set editing true, we have if editing, then return this, then otherwise return this. So edit, we have this, we have that, and edit. So we're not getting that actually updating, and the reason is because the way we had configured this this to-do remover was to create a to-do remover. So by that logic, we also need to call that anonymous function, and there we get the text updated. So this isn't a great user experience right now because it's completely blank field when the user goes to update, even though the text should contain something to begin with. It should contain what was already there. So we can do that. We could do that a lot of ways, but one way is to just initialize the input to have a placeholder. So we can make an optional placeholder prop, and then if we get that, could do something like placeholder equals placeholder or nothing in case that they don't pass anything in, or I think we can do like placeholder colon nothing, so that has a default value, or placeholder equals something like this. Some way to give placeholder default of empty quotes. Yeah, okay. I thought that that was possible. So placeholder is going to have empty quotes by default if we don't pass it in, but if we do have it, we can just do like we have, spread the props for placeholder. I guess it really should be called input placeholder, or we could group input name and placeholder into like an input props prop, but this will be fine for now. It's not the best, but the placeholder can come in, and that way if we pass this only for one of these usages, it should work fine, and the initial is going to be whatever the text was for the to-do to begin with. So we'll do placeholder, and we'll do const placeholder equals not new text, but just have it be the old text, and we'll do the same for the default value. So now we're getting those passed through to the input, and that way when we click edit, we should see item as the existing there, and the text for the item currently is being included with that ID, which makes sense because that was how these were set up to get created somewhere along the line. We see the item text. This one was just the default, I guess, so whereas if we created our own, these ones should not have that ID there. And we can update those. You see is the update successful? If we go like apples, yeah, it changes. If we delete it, we can delete it. We edit it, those changes, and if we delete everything, we have that placeholder text. So the default value is for getting the initial, and the placeholder was for that grayed out text if we delete everything. Now it's still allowing us on both of these forms to submit nothing. So one of the requirements we would want is some basic validation. So we can go to our inputs, which is in a component, so it's going to change everywhere as long as we change it in this one place. And so we could do something simple like required, and that's going to do a lot for us so that when we try to submit an empty form, it'll give us a default validation message. I don't really love these suggestions, so can we do like I think we can auto complete equals off, and then we won't get those suggestions as well. Sometimes you may want that, sometimes you may not. So we'll say required. That way it gives you, please fill out this field, and it won't let you actually submit that form unless it's filled. Problem is, it will leave white space is fine. So we need a pattern for no white space only, and that should be something like this, so that we can't just add a bunch of spaces and do it. There are also like white space characters that you can copy and paste. I just Googled this. You could just copy a bunch of different types of spaces and try pasting those into here and see, does it allow you? It doesn't seem to. So this pattern could maybe be improved. I don't really know all the parts of that regular expression well, so this might need to be tuned. But in general, it seems to say, please match the requested format, which is a pretty uninformative message, especially for someone who can't see this, but it's at least preventing us from submitting. And the same should also be true here, because we have a component. It's going to change that in every single place. We'll just be happy with that default validation rather than trying to build something of our own that ends up not being very accessible. So we're getting pretty close. I think one thing we still have to do is create some clearing, and then obviously we have to be able to save the data to the browser. So to clear data, we can do that with just a simple button that allows us to clear. So below our form, we can have the button that allows us to clear all to-dos. And so we'll add an on-click to this for, in this case, setting the to-dos to nothing is right, but at some point we're going to need a function for that because we'll be doing something more complicated. So we can do const to-do clearer, or just clear to-do. Rather than producing an anonymous function, it can just be that anonymous function by name, since it doesn't need to take any parameters. And for now, it can just set to-dos and have that be its return value. So the on-click, rather than having to be that, will just be the name clear to-dos without parentheses. Do not want those parentheses in this case. And so we should be able to clear all to-do items. Can we create like several of them and clear them all? Yes, we can. So definitely lacking some accessibility features here. This clear, for example, would not be announced to users with a screen reader, so that's an issue for the future. But now we have to handle state. So there are security concerns with local storage that you can research. Cross-site scripting attacks are of concern. So the IndexedDB is a good choice for this one. And there's a good wrapper, IDB IndexedDB promised, and this is a good asynchronous wrapper library for the default browser IndexedDB, which is like a database that's inside the browser, and so it'll allow you to persist things on reload, and this is a nice asynchronous API for it. So we'll have to install it as IDB from npm. So I will open up the terminal again. I had one open from before, so I'll stop the dev task and npm I IDB, and I'll have to restart the dev task. Now we're essentially going to be creating a little store here, so there are a lot of considerations for that with React, but we're just going to keep it as simple as possible for now. And to do that, we'll just follow the instructions from here. So I'm going to pull in open and delete from IDB, so we can open a database and delete a database. And the basic setup for a database, if we have like an async function that is get db promise. So an async function always returns a promise. So we'll get a db promise where we can do const db equals await OpenDB. Yes, we want to do that. We're going to need to give that a name. So the name of the database is not the name of the table, but it's the name of the entire database. So to do appdb is a fine name, a version, which is going to be 1, and then we have to pass in some sort of upgrade function to say how to create the initial schema for the v1 database. So I'll create a function, upgrade to v1, and I'll take the database, and what it's going to do is to create a new store, and it's key path ID. So this is going to say what is the path of the key, what's the name of the key for the items in the to-dos table. It is going to be ID, but I also want it to auto increment, so I don't have to pass in my own IDs. It'll just take care of IDs for me as long as I pass in other attributes. So this seems pretty good. Create object store. And the problem with this is this upgrade function only runs once. So if we get this set up and we make a mistake and we have to reinitialize with version 1, that won't run again. So we might want to have something that we can comment in and out that is like await delete database, so that we can just comment this in and out to get our DB reconfigured if we have mistakes. So we'll have that DB, and we're literally just going to return this. So that way we'll have a promise, a global promise, const db promise, and this can be get db promise. So we'll have one async thing that we can await, so to wait for the database to be ready to talk to, and then we can have functions for doing different things. So const db can be just a little object where we can do async add. We can do an add to do, a get all to do, a remove to do, an update to do. So this is pretty close to what I wanted to do. We're going to await the DB promise. I don't even know if we need to create a transaction like this. It might be even simpler than this, but this should work. And then we're waiting the transaction to be over. Same thing here. We're going to read all the to-dos, get all, remove. We're going to delete the to-do with the particular ID, and then we're going to use put for updating the to-do. Put is like a method to change something with the existing ID. So those look pretty good actually from Copilot, and DB is never read, so what we'll do is just call like db.add, db.getAll, db.remove, etc. And we don't really need our example anymore. So how can we initialize this? Well, we're going to need some way. Initially it's going to be probably empty, and since this is an asynchronous database, we're going to need to do this using a use effect. So that's going to be imported from React. So we'll have to go up here and import use effect, and then we're going to have to pass our upgrade function into here. So upgrade is one of the options, and it's going to be upgrade to v1. So upgrade should be an option for this. They don't really care what it returns. They don't say it should be async or not. It's just a callback function. And OpenDB is a async function. So this doesn't have to return anything necessarily. And we're going to make sure that the database is deleted. So I'm going to uncomment this and save. Since we have the dev server running, it's going to save it. and then I'm going to comment this back and uncomment this so we get an upgrade that sets up our database that single time correctly. That of course will only work if this runs, which it does because it's being called, hopefully. So now when we get into the app itself, the use effect is going to get all, and then, whoops, so we have an error where db.transaction is not working. Oh, and yes, this actually did have to return. I had the wrong one. This one has to return. The upgrade function does not have to return. This one has to return the database because that is the promise that we're waiting for in all of these. So now we have no to-dos in there, which makes sense because we haven't placed any to-dos in there. So this could be working, but we don't really know if it's setting the to-dos correctly. So to do that, we're going to need to actually add some to-dos. So this is going to do handle submit, which is ultimately going to take a new to-do and make prev to-dos like this, where really what we're going to want to do is just let everything handle itself. So we will set the to-dos, and then that will be based on the getter. So rather than doing it like this, we'll have the new to-do, and we'll simply call db.add new to-do, which is going to be asynchronous. So we'll do a .then. After that hopefully correctly works, then we will set to-dos to not this, but we will actually need to get all to-dos. So db.getAll, and once that returns its asynchronous result, so the result of this when we get everything from the store, then we should use the result of that to set the to-dos in the state. So we'll chain those promises together, and when we do something, it gets added, and if we reload our page, it's still there because it's getting pulled in from that use effect, and if we delete it, it's not working because it's only deleting it inside of state. So we can add a couple of these, reload the page, and they're sticking around, which is good. Next thing we have to do is make sure that our removals get persisted. So rather than setting the state, we're going to call db.remove, and remove takes the ID. I guess that's fine. I prefer if it just took the entire to-do, but that's fine. We'll do .then get all, then set to-dos, same thing, so we can get rid of our previous setter. So now when we delete and reload, the delete is persisted as desired. And next we need our to-do updater to do this. So rather than calling our setter and such, we should do a db.update to-do .then get all .then set to-dos. So if we delete those and edit and change this, it goes to the state, but does it get persisted? Yes. And then if we clear all, we reload, we see that everything comes back because clear all is just setting the to-dos, but what we need to do is have it actually clear everything. So maybe we should make an async clear function, which is going to clear the store, and that will be its job. So rather than this, we can simply do db.clear.then get all .then set to-dos once again. So clear, reload, and everything is gone. So just like that, we have a persistent to-do list that even if we close this down and come back to it another time, we're still going to have those to-dos inside of there. And we can make additions and deletions and reload and clear, and everything persists nicely. Last thing to do would be just make sure we have no errors and bugs. So watch the console while we do different basic tasks. Make sure that nothing crazy is happening. If we had multiple pages, we would want to navigate through those different pages. Obviously, this is not super accessible how close everything is, and there are other accessibility issues here that we'll still have to address. But in terms of the basic functionality, this pretty much covers it. So thank you for watching, and that'll do it for this speedrun.